me just. Okay. Well, I would like to welcome everyone to our first Lane Lyceum of the year. We are very excited to host Carol Patey today, and we are looking forward to a number of other lyceums down the road. And lyceums have a long history in New England. They were started back in the 1800s, and it was a place where people gathered to have in-depth, serious conversations about topics that mattered. And so we have continued having lyceums at First Parish UU, and we have named them after Ed Lane, who was a very beloved member of our congregation and a minister in his own right. And he just cared so much about learning and justice and caring for people. And so we have continued with the lyceums honoring him. I would like to, before we begin, I would like to just ask everyone to mute their screens, and because there are 5 questions, we're going to take questions at the end of each section. And we'll have then a discussion about that question on the ballot. So we'll do that 5 different times through the evening. I also, if you are new to the Lane Lyceums and would like to be part of, an ongoing notification, I will let you know of any upcoming lyceums that we have. And if you would like that, please put your name in the chat, and I will then put you on our mailing list. So also, if you have questions along the way, when you think of it, you can put it in the chat, and then we can talk about it at the end of that ballot question. Okay, so I would like to turn it over to Nancy Winberry, who will introduce our speaker for tonight. Okay, and again, welcome to everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Amy, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. We're very lucky to have Carol Patey here tonight. And typically for the Lane Lyceums, we're going out and trying to recruit someone to speak on a topic. In this case, Carol actually approached us and asked if we would like her to speak about the ballot questions. We're very lucky to have her here as our speaker. Carol is the president of the League of Women Voters in Needham, and I have a feeling there's many other League members here tonight. She previously worked as an analyst at the United States Governmental Accounting Office, but now fills her time with a lot of League work, and as well as gardening, quilting, and she's a town meeting member, I assume, in Needham. So thanks to Carol for offering to provide us with such helpful information in addressing these 5 ballot questions. I'm going to turn it over to Carol now, and I think you've got some PowerPoints that you're going to share with us. Is that correct, Carol? So yeah. Take it away. Thank you.
Can you see that? Yes?
Yeah, there's one, Carol, there's a black rectangle blocking a little bit of your PowerPoint on the right side.
That is, I'm going to change this so I don't. Is that better?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, good. That means I can't see it right now. I might have to see the chat, but that's okay. So thank you all for having me this evening to share information about the 5 ballot questions that are on the November 5th ballot. Every 2 years, there is the possibility that citizens will initiate questions to be placed on a statewide ballot. And as voters, it's important to understand them, and they're often very complex and have many moving parts. And so it takes a bit of work to understand them. I'm not an expert on these questions, but I have pulled together information from different sources. Later, when we have our discussion, there may be points where you know something that I haven't mentioned or something that you think isn't quite right. So just speak up at that point. I'd like to, well, first of all, I want to talk through what we're going to do tonight. I'll spend a little bit of time just talking about the ballot question process, because I think it's kind of interesting and people don't generally know it. But then we'll turn to the 5 questions. And on each one, I'll provide some background and then some pros and cons, and then I'll open it up to discussion. I'm hoping to spend about 10 minutes total on each one. And then at the end, I'll do a few reminders about how to get more informed and how to vote, including how to get to our leak site that has recordings of some of these very specific forms on questions. So Massachusetts is one of 26 states that has some sort of citizen-initiated process to change state law. Not every state has this. Article 48 of the Massachusetts Constitution, which amended the Constitution to allow citizen-initiated ballot questions, came from a constitutional convention in 1918. If you think back to 1918, what else was happening around there? Was lots of stuff, but particularly I think of the women's suffrage, which was 1920, so that era. Interestingly, 24 states, nearly half, have no mechanism for citizen-initiated ballot questions at all. Most of the states with citizen-initiated processes are west of the Mississippi River. Only one other New England state, Maine, has a process, and it is only for laws and not for constitutional amendments or referendums on existing law. So there are 3 types. There's initiative for a law that would create a new law or amend a law. There's an initiative to amend the state constitution, which is a little bit more involved process over a couple of years. And then there's a referendum on an existing law, which comes about when a group of citizens want to repeal an existing law. So the ballot question is a referendum on the law itself. Sometimes you'll hear that all of these referred to as referendums, but in our Constitution, just that type is considered a referendum. But all 5 questions this year are the first one, the initiative for a law. So we have had some of those other pieces over recent years, and you might recall some of them. So for an initiative petition for a law, it takes 10 qualified voters, just 10 people, to draw up and sign an original petition that they then file with the Attorney General in the year before the state election. So these ones were filed with the Attorney General in the spring of 2023. And then the Attorney General returns it with a summary of the law, which then the original petitioners submit the petition and this summary to the Secretary of State's office, and then the Secretary of State prepares the petition blanks. And that's what the original petitioners use to go out and get more signatures. They have to get signatures from 3% of the total votes cast for all candidates for governor at the last state election. So it's going to change every 2 years. But for last spring, that meant they had to get 75,000 certified voters. Pretty hefty thing. Then it is laid before the legislature, which means they give it to the legislature to see if the legislature will take action to pass it themselves. They can't pass it with any amendments. It's just as it is. And if they do, it becomes law and it would not go on the ballot. And the legislature has until the first Wednesday in May of the election year, so this past May of 2024, to do so. So obviously these 5 did not. If it's not passed, it can go on the ballot. Petitioners must then collect an additional 0.5% of the voters, or another 12,000. And by the way, they collect more than that because they're never sure, did somebody sign twice? Is the person really a registered voter? The address is wrong. There's multiple reasons it may not be certified. But all this is to say the state legislature did not pass any of these 5 laws when they had the opportunity. So here's a reminder of the 5 statewide questions on the November 5th ballot. As you can see, they're quite disparate. appealing to different people for different reasons, and all are potentially controversial. All of these have information in the Red Book, which you may have received at your home, the Massachusetts Information for Voters. It includes a summary of the, it's actually the summary that the Attorney General came up with originally, which also will appear on the ballot. It includes what your vote will do, a statement of fiscal consequences, and that's fiscal consequences to the state or to the municipality, not to us as individual voters. And then arguments from both sides, and then a full text of the law. So let's get into the questions. And I am not seeing a chat here, so because of the way I have this, so if there's something that Amy or Nancy that I need to know, just stop me.
Yeah. Yeah, we will. The only chat has been someone asking to be put on the list for further notifications.
Okay. So question 1 relates to the state auditor's authority to audit the legislature. Present law gives authority to the state auditor to audit accounts of all departments, offices, commissions, institutions, and activities of the Commonwealth, including those of districts and authorities created by the general court, that is the legislature. So that would include towns, for example, and cities. But this would specifically add, and the general court itself. The general court is the legislature. So it would add it to this list. It was advanced by our state auditor, Diane DeZoglio, and it's generally not supported by the legislature. And as you can see, the legislature did not pass this when it had the opportunity. The auditor typically audits executive branch agencies, doing performance evaluations and seeing if agencies are following rules and regulations. Now, the Center for State Policy Analysis, which is out of Tufts and does a very extensive look at ballot questions every 2 years, so some really good analysis, found that some core legislative functions are off limits to the auditor, and they would include votes, debates, committee assignments, and policy priorities. And she will not be able to examine them even if question 1 passes. The Center reports that other legislative activities might be subject to audit. For example, compliance with employee training rules or purchasing policies and practices. Any audits of the legislature would undoubtedly rely on cooperation from the legislators. If any of you have audited, if you know that you got to have some kind of cooperation to even see things. So it would depend somewhat on that. So reasons to vote yes. We elect the state auditor every 4 years to audit state entities to help make government work better. But the legislature is the only state entity refusing to be audited by the state auditor's office. Legislative leaders state that it is sufficient for the legislature to perform audits of itself through a private vendor. Yet, the legislature is continuously ranked as one of the least effective, least transparent legislatures in America, and is one of only 4 legislatures that exempts itself from public records laws. This law would enable the state auditor to shine light on how state monies are spent on the legislature, and will help increase transparency, accountability, and accessibility for the people of Massachusetts. Some reasons to vote against it. As laid out by some constitutional scholars, an audit of the legislature conducted by the state auditor, who is an executive branch official, without the legislature's consent would violate the separation of powers and legislative supremacy described in and required by the Massachusetts Constitution. And it's important to safeguard this separation. The legislature has already said this ought not be enacted, so back when it was laid before the legislature, that seems to indicate that they will not consent to cooperating, which can lead to a contentious and distracting fight between branches. Further, this authority could shift the state auditor's role into a more political one and potentially into being an influential participant in the legislative process, which would compromise the state auditor's ability to carry out her constitutional duty to conduct credible, independent, objective, and nonpartisan audits of state government departments and programs. So again, what would a yes do? It would specify that the state auditor has the authority to audit the legislature, and a no would make no change in that law. So I'll open it to any discussion. I'm going to.
I had a question.
Yep.
Am I right to think that if this were passed, if the yes votes outnumbered the no votes, that the legislature would be within their rights to overturn the law by their own vote?
The legislature can do that. The legislature can take a law that is passed and overturn it. So everything I've read in the past has been that they can do that. So I assume this would be as well. I can't imagine that there'd be something that would specifically prohibit something that's regulating them. So yeah, I mean, we've seen it, you know, you might recall with the cannabis, there was some stuff added that it didn't negate things, but you know, it softened things and so forth. So those things can happen. And it's just, this is a law. And as in any law, the legislature can modify it, you know, get rid of it, and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
Carol, how does it work in other states? Does it become a political issue or not?
So I know that the Tufts Center did look, you know, they did a little bit of work at other places. They don't talk about whether there's a section on audits in other states. Even in other states, legislative audits do not examine votes, amendments, or committee operations, as these are protected by separation of power. Legislative audits are smoother and more common in states where the auditor is appointed by the legislature. That's probably not surprising. But they didn't uncover any examples of auditors who completed legislative audits actively opposed by their state legislature. So it seems like state auditors have not really pushed that to their research, pushed it really hard.
Carol?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have a question, and I completely understand you cannot be an expert on every single one of these. I know it didn't mention that it used to be audited, the legislature, and then I guess it stopped.
Did I mention that? I don't recall that. So
so I had heard that, and I was just curious about, like, why would it have been in place and then stopped? But it's okay if you don't know the history of that.
I wasn't aware of that. No.
Yeah, and in fact, my question was going to be about what's been done up to this point. Has there been any auditing of the state legislature, or as you said, you know, is there any transparency?
Yeah, I have not seen anything that was done, and I'm not sure what really precipitated this frustration, except that she was trying to push it beyond what they had been doing before. But like, I'm not sure if, you know, years back that there were some audits done, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Claire, go ahead.
So given the exclusions that are already not negotiable, what could the auditor actually audit?
So the examples I've seen are things that are more regulation. I mean, certainly purchasing policies. You know, you'd like to think that the legislature would follow them. They're set by the executive branch, but still, you know, they're good.
So nothing about their processes then?
Not things like
their rules, because in my I've been working trying to promote legislation at the State House for 25 plus years, and the power structure is such that, you know, if the speaker doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. But so this wouldn't really affect that whole dynamic and the concentration of power at the top, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
No, but I have seen, you know, comments that it would make a statement and maybe would lead to some loosening up of some of the transparency issues.
Thank you.
Leslie, go ahead.
Carol, in the red book, there's the majority report after each question. Can you tell us who actually authors the majority report and whether their opinion is worth heeding in deciding our vote?
So it seems to be a committee that's established by the legislature, and I think it might be by, you know, both houses, yeah, senators and representatives, and it's there to, they sort of do the work to negate the whole legislature having to do it. And so in that sense, they do say that they have in people, you know, that they do some hearings and on things. So I take it that there is some more information available to them than just sitting and making a judgment on their own.
Thank you.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so question 2 is the eliminating MCAS as a high school graduation requirement. So right now, students must pass the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, the MCAS test, in mathematics, science and technology, and English to receive a high school diploma. And so this would take away the state requirement to pass the MCAS to graduate and puts it in the hands of the district. To get a diploma, a student would need to complete coursework that the student's district has certified as showing mastery of certain competencies. This does not eliminate the MCAS test. Students would still need to take the 10th grade MCAS exams, but they would no longer need to earn a passing score or other state approval to get a diploma. So reasons to vote yes. The Mass Teachers Association states that the MCAS, and they're the ones that supported this, that put this in up before the voters. So they state that the MCAS is a one-size-fits-all exam that fails to measure other student achievement measures, such as GPA, coursework, and teacher assessments in determining if a student is allowed to graduate. Replacing the MCAS graduation requirement with more comprehensive measures will let teachers stop teaching to a test and unburden students from a make or break standardized test. Eliminating MCAS as a graduation requirement will allow schools and teachers to focus on most important skills and knowledge to succeed in life, rather than having to focus on only those skills that can be measured on a standardized test. Reasons to vote no. The vote no on question 2 side says eliminating MCAS as a graduation requirement is unfair to kids and will increase inequality. Some school districts will just adopt lower standards so students graduate even if they haven't learned knowledge and skills they need to succeed. It would result in some students who are not ready to graduate being abandoned rather than getting the needed skills. Some districts will ease requirements to boost their sagging graduation rates. And it would eliminate the only common floor that ensures all graduating students meet basic education expectations. So this one is one of those ballot questions that's counterintuitive. The yes would eliminate the requirement that students pass the MCAS in order to graduate high school, but still require students to complete coursework that meets state standards, and a no vote would make no change. So if you are against requiring passing MCAS as a graduation requirement, you would vote yes. And if you're for keeping MCAS, you would vote no. So thoughts from folks?
Yeah.
Any?
I have some comments.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in support of this yes on 2 position. I am an educator. I've lived the life of what it's meant to be in an MCAS system for decades because it's been in place for that long. It hasn't done anything to close gaps one of the reasons why Massachusetts does so well is because we have very high level curriculum frameworks. And as educators, we teach to those frameworks. We plan lessons around those frameworks, and we also are evaluated by them. So what makes us strong is our curriculum frameworks, not an MCAS test. In terms of the no arguments, one of the things that will happen, and I'm going to say when this passes, because I'm hoping it does pass, there'll be a state legislature who will look at, it will file a bill to ensure that all districts are following the recommended course suggestions from the state. And I am very certain that that's what's going to happen, so that there will be a standard across Massachusetts districts. I
Julie,
could say,
do you have a sense that there are school districts that are very careful about going by the certain, they make these plans for what they'll cover and they cover them well and so forth, and there are other school districts that aren't so good at that?
well, see, what's happening right now is what the requirements are that there's a recommended mass core of courses. And so it's recommended, so therefore districts have had flexibility as to what's required in order to graduate. And Senator Lewis is on record as saying, I'm going to file a bill right after to have that conversation to occur, that districts across the Commonwealth adopt the recommended mass core, and that will create that standard across the Commonwealth. And furthermore, we're only one of 8 states that still tie in some test with a diploma instead of students satisfying what is required. And those 7 states are Illinois, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Wyoming, and Florida. I'm not sure I mentioned Florida. New York is also in the mix, but New York State is in the process of taking a test score, taking it, not delinking it from a graduation of receiving a diploma. So it's very odd that we've had this in place for so long.
Nancy, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, I have 2 different questions. I'll ask one and then see if there's other people who want to ask a question. My question would be how the MCAS requirement as it exists impacts special ed students who may have some challenges in reading and or one of the areas that is being assessed.
I have a little understanding of that, but I'm thinking that maybe our last questioner knows better.
Yes, it has affect special ed students. In fact, I had to do, I'm full disclosure, I collected signatures to get this on the ballot. I'm a Mass Teachers Association member. I have to say a lot of parents that I talked to when we were trying to collect signatures were very concerned about this, because they might say, I have 5 children, 4 of them aren't going to have any problems, but one of my children is going to, and felt it was very unfair that if that student completed 12 years public education, that they should get something, a diploma, in order to recognize their hard work. The other group it affects is English language learners. We are asking students within 2 years of coming into our school system, those who are their first language is not English, to take this test. And it's only now offered in 10th grade in Spanish. And so that means if you are another student speaking another language, you're taking this test not in your native language. So are we are we measuring language proficiency, which we shouldn't, these tests are not designed to do those. You know, because if it's content, you'd want it in the student's primary language.
Other comments? Nancy, you had another question?
Okay, well, I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but I'm curious whether there are statistics about MCAS passage for lower income, urban students versus students from higher income communities. I don't know if anybody has information about that.
I do.
Go ahead.
No, it's true. It's truly correlated. It's correlated with high income districts doing very well in this test, and lower diverse socioeconomic diverse communities not doing so well. Yes.
So fewer high school graduates as a result from lower income or less advantaged areas.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last comment.
I'm just wondering if there are fewer graduates based on the MCAS requirement from the lower income, less advantaged areas.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the numbers are on passage is something like ultimately, you know, they can take it in 10th grade, then they can take it again 11th grade and 12th. I think it's just once each year. I'm not sure. But only a little more than 700 students who couldn't pass the MCAS end up being denied diplomas based on that requirement. And there are a couple of other options for them with some looking at their portfolios and some, I presume that's a bit of an involved process. So and probably they're not the students who someone will help them. You know, there's someone there to guide them through that. I mean, I think, you know, thinking back to when this went in place, one of the big issues was how does an employer, for example, know that someone has the skills when they have a high school diploma, that really means something. So, you know, that's the flip of all of this that you don't, and that's why, for example, the chambers are against eliminating just the other side. Any other thoughts?
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Jane, do you want to go ahead?
This is Kevin, actually.
Kevin House.
But Jane's here. Sheila, I hear what you're saying, and I have teacher friends that do also are concerned about the MCAS. I wish that the law that you're talking about was part of this proposition, because I have no faith in this legislature. There's so much that they haven't passed that are good things, and that will just sit and not get passed, because I get frustrated with the legislature. So I just because that's one of the discussions against this is that there's nothing's being put in its place. So sounds good. I wish that law was part of this whole thing, just so that you had something else coming in place of it.
Right. I can tell you that there are groups right now. You see, this MCAS was never supposed to be a one test, like in the form that it exists. It was supposed to be multiple ways for students to show learning. And it got just to this one test. That's what happened and what developed. There are a number of educators involved with performing-based assessments, and they're now being piloted in different districts in Massachusetts. So everyone's looking for that kind of coming up with other things. What will that look like? What should it look like? They're going to develop it. And I really am quite sure that there's going to be some movement in the legislature on this, because they know this has been a concern that has been raised. And I truly think that there will be some movement, even from the Department of Education, because they'll want to do this in some way as well. So I can hear the hesitation, but
okay,
I'm hopeful.
Thanks, Kevin. Deborah.
You're muted.
You're muted, Deborah.
Thank you. So I am also an educator and only in second grade, but I will tell you that the fear of MCAS started that young. I think that it does still separate the, students, and it affects kids in, I'm actually for this, for eliminating it also, because kids who are, not test takers, just don't, just, have high anxiety, special ed, English language learners. There's a host of children for which this is going to not only be difficult to pass, but cause horrible anxiety. And, and like Sheila said, you go through 12 years working your heart out, and then you just don't get a diploma. And that totally changes your chances for success in society. And so I feel strongly that at least, I mean, I'm sure that it will have some, there are a set of frameworks that we are required to teach to. And, up till now, I mean, I've watched over the last 20 years, and, teachers are teaching to the test, and they aren't teaching really critical stuff. Like social studies has been just put on the back burner. And what's more important than teaching children about the people around them, the people in different parts of the world? I mean, they will teach, gravel and, to ad nauseum because it's on the test, So I really feel like it will be important for for school districts to keep standards high, but basing it on one test is totally unfair to the children and to the teachers.
We have another question in the chat. Is it a GED requirement? Does anybody know?
I think that's
I spoke with one voter again during the canvassing, and he told me no. He says I could do a GED in 7th grade, pass it. I wouldn't. He said he just couldn't believe that this was in place. I guess for that, for that reason. I just wanted I'm sorry, to add something to what Deb said. I thought it was well stated. The other thing, what we're not doing is, because we are relying on these 3 tested subjects, we are not engaging students and creating curriculum that actually will help them be better productive citizens, because we don't have time to talk about, literacy and media and analysis of what we're hearing, and thinking about bias. We're not doing enough. It's definitely not. There are so many financial literacy. These civic showcases that are now. I know Needham puts one out in the spring. They're wonderful things. The kids are engaged. It makes them understand connections between issues they care about, and who are the people, decision makers that can make find solutions for these problems, and how they can organize and work together to talk to legislators. So there's a lot more that we could be doing that would be valuable for students in their futures. And that's all I'll say.
Interesting. That happens for 11th graders in Needham. So they're done the MCAS for the most part. Interesting. Okay, I guess we should probably go on, unless there's a burning question out there. Okay. So the next question. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. If we get rid of the MCAS, won't individual schools find it to their advantage to really lower the standards so that their students can pass, and they will do better on different measurements, comparative measurements?
That is one of the arguments out there against it. You hear that said, and I think it is hard to know how different school districts will react. A school district that has a lot of the resources it needs is going to react differently from one that has bare minimum.
Yeah, my concern is that students won't get the education that they need to be successful because the school will just kind of push them along.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
an educator may feel differently, I'm sure.
No, what I'm saying, unfortunately, you should see how many parents argue to pass their kids along. I mean, that's, to me, is incredible, but that's a piece of this too. I don't see lowering standards. I think what this will do is create more opportunities. But that's just my opinion.
Okay. Neil, go ahead.
Yeah. Don't we have don't we know what's going to happen? Isn't that why, as going back to what Wendy said, isn't that why MCAS was passed in the first place? Because school districts did exactly what Wendy said. We're doing exactly what Wendy said.
I can tell you that's not where it came in play. It came in play because there was something required at the federal level.
Well, for whatever reason,
but
there was a need for it in Massachusetts and other states. And if we don't have something, then I think Wendy's probably right. We'll just revert to what it used to be.
And that's where an alternative maybe could help solve that.
And what makes us think an alternative is going to happen? How long has Prop 2.5 been the law in the state when state legislators and the population and elected officials outside of the state legislature really wanted to modify Prop 2.5, and they're afraid of what the voters want. And they're going to interpret this vote as saying, we don't want a standardized exam.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to replace it. That's my opinion.
And there's a process for a citizen petition to do that. I mean, I think that's that's we don't know, and that's what you as voters have to decide.
Is there are we actually talking about getting rid of the MCAS or just not making it a requirement for graduation?
The latter, yeah.
It's still going to be in place.
It will still be doing
in place, so you'd still be able to compare
right
students across.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And Priscilla, would you like to make a comment too? Oh, maybe not. Priscilla, did you want to say something? Okay, I guess we're all set.
All right, should we shift gears then?
Yeah.
This is oops. There we go. There. Unionization for transportation network drivers. Yes, it is quite a shifting of gears, isn't it? This is a very lengthy proposal. The summary alone is 5+ paragraphs long, and the law is 8.5 pages in the Red Book. So I don't know if you guys remember back to the cannabis one. I believe this was the same way. There were many pages there for that when that passed. Basically, it allows drivers for transportation networks, and we're talking here Uber and Lyft particularly, who are, so the drivers are right now independent contractors, and it allows them to form a union, something that independent contractors normally could not do. It would allow them to collectively bargain with companies to negotiate wages, benefits, terms, and conditions of work. Companies could form multi-company associations to represent them in those negotiations, and they can work together. State would supervise those activities. The law would define unfair work practices and would establish a hearing process. And then the law would establish criteria for who can be part of the negotiations. Drivers and unions and companies would be required to bargain with these unions. There's much more detail in the Red Book. For example, It defines active drivers, and they come into play when you're looking at who can vote and who can be part of this. And it defines active drivers as those who would be able to vote, as drivers who completed more than the median number of rides in the previous 6 months. And this is an odd assortment of, quote, employees. They're not employees, but workers who some work, twice a month, some work every day. And so should they have the same ability to decide on things, and basically they can. That's all laid out in here, who can vote and how they all are counted. Oops. Wait a minute. 1, 2, 3. Okay, sorry. So reasons to vote yes on this. The proponents assert that this law would give the rideshare drivers new leverage to improve their working conditions. It would not only allow for unionization, but also ensure that drivers can get sustainable wages, benefits, and working conditions. It would allow drivers to push for further gains. The Center for State Policy Analysis, this is the Tufts organization, reports that once you account for car maintenance and the time between rides, for example, the new wage guarantee that they recently won in a settlement with Uber and Lyft only amounts to $15 to $25 per hour. There's the possibility that this would transform the whole gig economy, with starting with these drivers, making sector-based bargaining the new standard for states looking to support gig workers, and could bring stability to a flexible but sometimes precarious industry. A reason to vote for it if you were in favor of that. Reasons to vote no. Opponents of the law say it would result in raising the prices for all riders, with the increases funding unions, not drivers. Drivers in Massachusetts already receive good benefits. So the base, I guess that was, I believe this was settled on in that some kind of a settlement with the state at some point, a base of $32.50 per hour, and they've got paid sick leave, paid family medical leave, and other benefits. Drivers will lack control over union leadership. Is a reason that some people say you should not vote for this. The law sets up a low threshold for choosing a bargaining representative. It's just 25% of the active drivers. Remember, active drivers are those in the top median, above a median. So that would be roughly 12.5% of all drivers that would be choosing a bargaining representative. And some rideshare drivers may not have any say in the collective bargaining process that determines their working conditions. If you're not an active driver, you don't get to choose your representatives. And if you drove less than 100 trips in the previous quarter, you won't get to vote on contract terms. And the union must have signed authorizations from at least 5% of active drivers, which are those completing more than the median number of rides. Thus, it lets 2.5% of drivers determine whether or not they unionize. So here's with this is a logical yes and no here. Yes would provide these drivers the option to form unions, and a no would make no change in the law relative to the ability of transportation network drivers to form unions. So let's open it for discussion. Anybody have any thoughts on this one? It is one of those where you were speculating, and if I can't see hands right now, so if somebody has a question, just go ahead and speak up. Pretty straightforward? No, not at all. I think just the opposite. I'm not quite sure what to ask because I can't get my head around the whole thing. I want people who do these jobs to get a decent wage, but I'm not sure if that will happen or not with this. So, Neil, how about you?
Yeah, I would just like to point out that these workers can now join a union. What this law does is what the National Labor Relations Act does at the federal level. It puts the federal government behind and sets the rules for these types of workers, not employees workers to and sets the rules, as you said, Carol. There are 8 pages of this law that is establishing the rules both for the employers. I'm sorry, for these non-employee workers and for the employers to behave as they should behave if there is a union. It's not that it's illegal for them to join a union or they can't join a union. They can. It's not. It's simply creating the background, institutional support at the government level for both the workers and the firms to bargain collectively. Thanks.
So
is that a good thing?
Okay. So you would say that they could form a union without this?
Yes, but they're certainly not going to without the protection of a law like the National Labor Relations Act. If you go back and look at the history of unions in general at the federal, in general, it took the National Labor Relations Act of the 1930s and the New Deal to establish the rules and the institutional protections for workers to join unions. Prior to that, prior to the National Labor Relations Act, the businesses were able to basically get state and local and federal governments to basically enforce anti-union behavior as being against the constitutional and as a federal constitution as being anti-competitive. And therefore, we needed the National Labor Relations Act that FDR got passed in Washington to create the environment that protected workers and established the rules workers to join unions and to organize unions, and created the rules in terms of a bargaining process between the employers and the employees.
So they're not employees, though, correct? They are.
Correct. They are not. As at this point in time, the U.S. Department of Labor still is not allowing them to be considered as employees. That's correct.
Thank you. Other thoughts, ideas, questions?
So Neil, are you saying that this is a good rule to give the drivers more of a say?
If we think unions are good and they do some significantly good things, I mean, we wouldn't have a whole lot of the labor laws that exist right now in terms of protecting workers if it hadn't been for unions. If you look back at the history of unions and the development of the work rule laws kind of stuff and safety laws, they came out of unions and unions negotiating and then getting Congress to pass those laws. So, and the data suggests that yes, unions effectively increased workers' wages and well-being in terms of fringe benefits, et cetera. And by the way, I'm not a union member, I'm a labor economist.
Other thoughts? How about we move on then?
Yeah.
So question 4, this is totally another change to what's commonly thought of as mushrooms, but certain natural psychedelic substances and regulating them and legalizing them. So what would it do? It would allow people 21 and over to grow, possess, and use these substances. And by the way, these substances, they're all crazy. Oh. I'm sorry, did that go away for you? It says my screen sharing is paused. Did it?
We can see what the law would do.
Oh, okay, great. So, I don't know what just happened, but okay. So these substances, 2 substances found in mushrooms, psilocybin and psilocin, and 3 substances found in plants, and it's dimethyltryptamine. I said that many times and still struggle. Mescaline and ibogaine, which is a compound derived from the roots of a West African shrub. And I gotta get this back. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop my sharing and come back to it if you don't mind. hit something that makes it, it's making it be small, but
I think if you double click on it, it will get larger.
No, I did not do it. You are screen sharing, it says. Are you seeing anything right now?
Yes, it's your first slide.
Yeah, okay. So it's, now are you seeing it all?
Yes, what would the law do? And it's page 1 of 2.
Okay, so. That's not the one. No, that's the one. That's the final one. That's why it's all looking familiar to me. Then not in order. Okay. So yes, it would let the people 21 and over grow, possess, and use certain of these substances. They could be purchased at an approved location for use within a licensed facilitator's supervision. We provide for regulating and taxing these substances. Some of this starts to look familiar if you followed the cannabis question at all. Would prohibit other retail sale of natural psychedelic substances, would license and regulate facilities offering supervised use, and would allow people 21 and older to grow and use these substances at home, possess specific amounts beyond what they grow, and give away a limited amount to a person 21 and over. It also would create a commission to oversee all this, allow cities and towns to restrict where, when, and how licensed facilities offer these substances, would provide for a sales tax, a state sales tax, an additional excise tax of 15%, and possibly it would be up to municipalities to decide if they wanted to add another 2% tax. And then the revenues would go to a fund for administering that. So reasons to vote yes. Proponents report that research from leading medical institutions, including Mass General Brigham, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Johns Hopkins, shows that psychedelic medicines can be effective treatments for depression and anxiety. In fact, the FDA recently granted psilocybin a breakthrough therapy designation. For many who are suffering, daily medications and other standard treatments aren't working, and these could be helpful to them. Natural psychedelic medicine can also offer patients with a terminal diagnosis relief from end-of-life anxiety. The opponents would say that question 4 would decriminalize psychedelics, open for profit centers, and allow for growth in homes and distribution statewide, making a black market inevitable with this amount of home growth. They note that 1 in 3 frequent psychedelic users report driving under the influence of psychedelics in the past year, and this will increase with this law. The psychedelic ibogaine has life-threatening cardiotoxicity. Heart failure can occur days after one dose, and there's concern about accidental consumption of edibles, which are especially dangerous to children and pets. So, one more thing, the centers aren't required to be run by medical professionals and can't provide critical care during adverse reactions, and aren't prohibited from giving psychedelics to high-risk patients like those with schizophrenia, bipolar illness, and those who are pregnant or breastfeeding. So a yes vote would allow people over 21 to use these substances under licensed supervision and to grow and possess limited quantities of those substances in their home. And it would also create this commission to regulate them. No vote would make no change in the law regarding natural psychedelic substances. Thoughts, questions?
I guess I don't understand. I have no problems in having psychedelics used in therapeutic centered sessions and centers with people who are familiar and can guide them and create a therapeutic environment for that person. But if anybody over 21 can grow them and give them to friends. They're not going to be done in a supervised setting. So it just seems like it's a very broad law that I think goes too far.
Has anyone read Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind? It's a very, very interesting book. He tries several of these types of psychedelics, all under guidance, but he talks about doing it without guidance too. And between that and what I've been hearing, it sounds like the language in this. Now, I haven't read it myself. I'm just parroting what I've heard, like on NPR and read in the Globe, that this isn't quite ready for prime time, and there aren't enough guardrails on it for practical application. So,
Eleanor.
Yeah, this is one of the only ones I feel a little bit more sure about how I want to vote. I agree with Amy and with Claire. It does two things. I think the case for medical use is really compelling. And it was on the Jim and Marjorie show today, this woman talking about how her life was really changed by using that. And that's great. But why they coupled it with this ability to grow it at home and to give it to anyone over 21 in, probably an unguided way with these hallucinogenic drugs. I think it's such a shame that those two were put together. And I think there's so much potential here. My only thought is that maybe just by asking the question, it's going to give more publicity, and hopefully that will be used more. But I think I'm tending to vote no, because I just don't like that coupling with the growing and giving it out in an unsupervised way.
Well, I kind of wanted to comment. I'm a physician. I spent a lot of my professional career running a substance abuse unit, so I have a lot of opinions and probably experience of this. And I agree with what Eleanor just said. I mean, I think there's also, if you want to look at prior experiences with this kind of legislation, just look at Oregon. Oregon decriminalized a lot of drugs, including mushrooms, and it has led to a lot of problems. And now they have decided to withdraw this bill, and because so many people went to Oregon, and it became a kind of place where people were using drugs. And so I think, I have to wonder who wrote this and for what purpose. I don't think, if you are, did the Mass General at Brigham and any other hospital write this? I don't think so. I think that they have the ability to, there needs to be more data. There needs to be more studies. There are ways that these drugs help people in very, very restricted situations. But, just like with the marijuana legalization, the marijuana that people are using now is so much stronger than what we, us old hippies used 40 years ago. It's something that wasn't anticipated and wasn't thought about. And so now there are all these problems with gummies and people overdosing, and, hospitals are dealing with the medical consequences of strong marijuana. But imagine you work in an emergency room and now you got people coming in on mushrooms and stuff. I mean, I'm just saying, as a physician, I would be just careful. I'm not against decriminalizing certain things, and I'm not a prude, but I think this is clearly written with somebody with some intention that I don't quite trust.
Okay. Leslie, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I was tending to be in agreement, especially for the use of the substances in a therapeutic setting, because that there's a lot of research that suggests that could be terrific. But the personal use amounts, my husband, who has a better handle on this stuff, says the amounts just make no sense. For example, 1 gram of DMT is a huge amount versus 1 gram of psilocybin is a negligible amount. So the quantities that they're proposing in this law are nonsensical. So I don't know how they came up with those amounts.
Okay. All right. Unless there's other comments, let's move on to the last one. I'm going a little over here. I hope you can bear with us here on this one. So this is on the minimum wage for tip workers. Massachusetts wage now is $15 per hour. It's minimum wage, but minimum wage is different for tip workers. For example, waiters, bartenders, manicurists, salon workers, etc. These workers are guaranteed the full minimum wage, but employers can pay them as little as $6.75 per hour, providing that tips make up the difference. I think that's something that it wasn't as well known until all this started being discussed, that employers still do need to make up that difference if they're not getting $15 per hour with their tips. So basically, question 5 would phase out this $6.75 tipped minimum wage in Massachusetts, requiring employers to directly cover the full minimum wage of their workers by 2029. It's a, what, 9% or so increase. Right now, the minimum is $6.75, which is 45% of the non-tip workers' minimum wage. So for those that are right at $6.75, that's quite a jump for an employer that first year. I will say, I have a person I'm close to who works at a restaurant, and he's in Boston, and he's $13 an hour is his minimum wage. So I think that, and I don't know to what extent this happened, but I imagine that employers with a shortage of those kinds of workers have had to raise that somewhat, at least in some locations and for some types of establishments. So it would require employers to continue to pay those tip workers the difference between the state minimum wage and the total amount that a tip worker gets through the end of 2028 or until they are at the minimum wage level. It would permit employers to calculate this difference over an entire weekly or biweekly payroll period. And then that requirement to pay this difference would stop when the required hourly wage becomes 100%. There's one more thing that this does, and that is to allow pooling of tips with the non-tip staff. If an employer pays its workers an hourly wage that is at least that state minimum wage, the employer could administer a tip pool that combines all the tips that customers give to tip workers and distributes them among the back of the house as well as the front of the house. So reasons to vote yes, tip workers deserve this full minimum wage plus tips. It creates some financial stability for them. For tip workers, it acknowledges those workers' skills and professionalism. The proponent of this, One Fair Wage, it's a national organization, believes tips should be a reward for good service, not a subsidy for low wages. And further, with allowing the pooling of tips and distribution of non-tip workers, it could help equalize pay between the front and back of the house employees. Reasons to vote no, and I will say people are very strong opinions of this in the industry. Some tip workers have clearly stated they don't want the way they earn money to change. They are still guaranteed the $15 minimum wage, and then earn over $40 per hour, with 90% reporting at least $20 per hour. The Committee to Protect Tips reports that 90% of tip workers believe that if tip workers are eliminated, tip wages are eliminated, they will earn less. They also report there have been catastrophic results where this has been implemented. Particularly, they mention Washington, D.C., where they report nearly 10% of the tip employees have lost or left their jobs following increases in menu prices and the implementation of 20% service fees, as well as a wave of closures. Negative effects that the Committee to Protect Tips report include reducing overall wages for servers, increasing costs of restaurants, increasing the cost of eating out, and forcing restaurants to close. Last week we had a forum on this, and we had a restaurant owner against it, and we had a worker who was for it. And I will say it's very passionate. It's very much, will have ideas on this strongly. So yes vote would increase the minimum hourly wage an employer must pay a tip worker over 5 years, at which point employers could pool all tips and distribute them to all non-management workers in front of the house and back of the house. And a no vote would make no change in the law, either governing the tip pooling or the minimum wage for tip workers. So what are thoughts or questions on this?
Do you know who proposed this? Who was the backer for this?
It is that organization, Fair Wage. It's a national organization, and they are out there nationally focusing on this. The person who spoke for it at our forum is a member of that. And she's worked at a restaurant in Boston, and she feels strongly that they should be getting that full amount as a wage.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that until they get up to the $15 an hour, the back of the restaurant workers are going to be making more than the tipped workers because they already get minimum wage, and they're going to also get the pooled tips. Whereas the front workers have to have 5 years before they get to that amount, and they'll lose, they'll be pooling.
The pooling cannot go into effect until they are at the point where the front of the house workers are making that minimum wage.
Oh, okay.
Minimum wage, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But some of the numbers I saw show the average hourly wage for back of house workers is more than the minimum wage, more than the full minimum wage, like something like 17. Not a lot, but it is more than the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Do we have any restaurant workers or people with kids who are restaurant workers or former restaurant workers in our midst?
Carol?
Any thoughts from those folks?
Yeah. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, a couple of comments. Tipping in Europe is unheard of, except for very small amounts. There are lots of restaurants that exist in Europe, Western Europe primarily. I'm familiar with. Don't know enough about Eastern Europe at this point. Also, I was doing a little bit more reading about minimum wage and finding out that minimum wage is pretty, if you think about it, the history of it here in this country, it really didn't come into play until post-Civil War because it enabled the white workers to discriminate against the black workers without having any laws that opposed it. Today, there's lots of data that shows that tipping is certainly leading to degrees of inequality, or leading to inequality amongst the tipped workers for characteristics that are unrelated to their job, such as, are they good looking? What's their race or ethnicity, etc. Do we want to support a system that creates an easy situation for inequality in terms of pay, unrelated to their performance, to their productivity, to their value to the employer? Tipping can be very problematic, and is, I say. There are lots of studies that show that there are these factors that we would, in other circumstances, think as being harmful to a society that's supposed to be equitable, that are allowed to exist because of tipping. Thanks.
Can I ask? Well, go ahead, Nancy.
Okay. Well, I'm the parent of a daughter who was a waitress many, many years ago on Cape Cod. She loved the fact that she worked for tips and did not have to declare much of any of that income. I'm wondering how tip workers do feel about the tax impact if they are receiving a minimum wage or more, that they now have to declare at least that income, whereas when you're working for tips, it's something that's more of a discretionary. It can be revealed or not, depending upon the person. So I'm curious whether tip workers are in favor of this or not. I guess I like what Neil said. I traveled in Australia and there was essentially no tipping, but it did impact the quality of the performance, or the service that was provided. We had good food, but it came whenever they felt like, bringing it. And, we watched some of the waiters or waitresses just standing around kibitzing with each other. And that's not a criticism, but, does tipping increase the quality of the service? So I'm just raising those as different questions.
Just one thought on that the point of sale thing now, where so many people use credit cards, the tip is in there and that is known by the restaurant. I don't know to what extent that's reported, but I do know that we had the restaurant owner that was there last week said when they file their tax returns with the state, they need to give the name of the software that they're using, is it Toast or whatever. And the assumption is that the state goes and looks at some of that and may use that in other ways. I don't know. But
interesting. Okay.
It's a little different now than it was.
Yeah. The only way they can avoid paying taxes on it is if you tip them in cash.
And I often tip in cash, but
I wanted to ask Bill a question since he's a labor economist. I just got back from Europe, like Nancy and Australia. I didn't have to tip. The service was good. It was fairly expensive, but so Neil, how did this happen? How do you get to a no tipping situation? How does that evolve, with labor versus owner? How do you get there? Is it like this referendum, or how does that happen?
Sorry, David, I don't know the answer to that question. Europeans apparently, the little I know about it is Europeans have had tipping for much longer than the US has, than it's been in the United States. So it had a longer time to evolve, and they have a different attitude towards compensation of workers a bit, I think, as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make one comment. I think about, when you are a waiter, bartender in a high-end restaurant establishment, you do very well. But when I think about those workers who are perhaps, in the restaurant friendlies, I don't even know if it still exists. If you think about those coffee shops, places where people work, they're not getting tipped much because the bill isn't high, so I think those are the people that probably suffer too under the existing situation if they're not making enough money to make ends meet.
Okay, Leslie.
I haven't heard anybody commenting on how tips have changed in the last 5 years. We certainly are tipping more, aren't we? We got used to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Leslie, go ahead.
It's probably a moot question because Carol already said that most people tip via their credit card. But I just wondering if the tipped workers are shooting themselves in the foot regarding future Social Security income, if they're earning money that's not reported and then at the end of the day they don't have Social Security to live on.
That's a good point.
Okay, Eleanor?
Yeah, I just had a question. I'm trying to understand. It seems like under the current law, workers are getting paid minimum wage because if they don't get enough tips, then the employer makes up the difference and they are getting minimum wage now. Is that right?
That is true. Compliance might be another issue, but talking to my son, who's the waiter, who said it's all so obvious now with all of the credit card stuff that they
Right.
know.
So I guess I didn't quite understand
Yeah.
what you were saying, Neil, about or what other people were saying about people getting penalized for not getting as many tips, because we know everyone's getting the minimum wage and the any tips, they could still make more than that from their tips, but at least they're getting that. So I just wanted to clarify that because it didn't seem like if there was some kind of discrimination or something like that, those people are still getting the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Well, as others have pointed out, if you pay in cash, those things don't get recorded, and there are people who may be making a whole lot more than that minimum wage that
Yeah.
the employer is required to pay than those who don't work in a place where they have the opportunity really to get significant tip earnings.
I have a daughter who's worked in the back of the house and, she's worked her tail off to produce pastries and desserts and but they don't get the tips. So I'm all in favor of tips being pooled and shared with back of the house employees. Because they work really hard. They work as hard, I think, as the front of the house staff, but they don't get the benefits.
So it makes you kind of say, so who is behind all of this really? And I will say, I took a look at where the money was coming from. About, I don't know, I think it was 58%, something like that, of the money that came in for this campaign against it is from the Restaurant Association, Massachusetts Restaurant Association. And a lot of the rest was from restaurant groups. So they are envisioning they're going to have to raise wages. And they're not sure, and that means they're going to have to raise costs, and that makes customers unhappy. So it's a trade-offs here and there. And I think as you think about it, you just have to think, where is the better effect?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it though, if the restaurant owners are depending on tippers to pay the wages, that's an externalized cost for them. Shouldn't we really be paying the actual cost of the labor and then the tip be, what, based on, our experience at the restaurant, rather than feeling obligated to pay it just to make up for lost wages, which I didn't even know they were supposed to pay up to the restaurant owners were supposed to pay up to the minimum wage, which isn't a living wage anyway, really, not in Massachusetts. But I guess I'm just kind of spitballing here. But I was a waitress a long time ago, 50 years ago. I worked in Friendly's and I did get minimum wage plus tips. But in every restaurant I worked in, we always pooled the tips or a portion of the tips for the back of the house. But that was last century. So
yeah, that's not, my understanding is that's not allowed now. You can't, the employer cannot require that the front of the house workers' tips get pooled with the back.
But isn't there more restaurants, I think, are adding an additional fee, a 2 or 3% fee that is for the back of the house, so that they can make sure that they're taken care of. Yes. At least that's how it's explained on the menus.
I'm not sure I trust them.
No, I mean, shouldn't that just be included in the cost of eating out? I mean, it shouldn't be at the discretion of the diners. Those people need to be making a living wage, and that should be included in the cost of our meals.
Yes, this is one of those you got to sort of vote your conscience here. All right, I think we probably
don't we think that people will actually pay? You know, people the restaurant owners are concerned about the cost of their product, of the food they're delivering, and so on. But we as consumers will probably not be impacted very much because we're not going to be giving as big a tip. If we know the tips are coming through or being essentially the equivalent of the tip is already being paid to these workers by the employer, are we as consumers going to be willing to add on the 15 to 20% that we've been doing now? Certainly they don't do it in Europe. If people do leave money for a tip, I was reading about Rick Steves. You guys probably, many of you know Rick Steves. What's his recommendation? That people tip in Western Europe and France at best at 5%. So there's a 10% cost that we will not be bearing anymore. So
the restaurant prices will go up, I assume.
Prices will probably need to go up, but because we're tipping, we'll probably tip less. And I think the waiters are the ones that are going to come out in that end of that. Think about how much you tip.
Well, and look at the tip amounts too. When I was working back in the day, it was 15% was the standard. And you got less if you did crappy, and you got more if you did really well. And now it seems like the minimum is 18, 20%. How does this creep up? That we're supposed to pay more and more of our bill for the tip. It's like tip inflation. And now you're considered a cheapskate if you only give 15%, right?
Right.
Do you know you could have made more if you touched the customers?
What?
Yep. If you come and sort of tap them and be friendly, you make more in tips.
Yeah.
Young women of certain physiques, etc., and how they display those physiques make more. I won't go into
that wouldn't have worked for me.
just pointing out what the empirical evidence shows about the tips and sort of inequities in terms of how they're received and how they're paid out.
That's a good point. And I also want to see it from the other perspective of how many waitresses are the person who they're waiting on is making lewd comments, inappropriate comments. I mean, this whole dynamic that can also exist. And the waitress is like, I want my tips. I'm going to humor the guy, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a piece of that too that is in play, and what's involved in tipping as well.
Yep.
It'll be interesting to see how this one comes out. If it's okay, I think we should just move on and close down because we're almost at 9.
Yeah, I think we do need to kind of at our
Carol, we've probably exhausted you.
Oh no, that's fine. Well, you can see I don't know everything. So I just wanted to go through a few of the resources if you want more information, and if you want more information generally for the election. So the Red Book is a great place. If one didn't come to your house, you can get to that at the Secretary of State's website. Lots of stuff there, by the way. And I've been talking about this Top Center. This Voter's Guide to 2024 Massachusetts Ballot Questions is a really excellent piece where the state Red Book, those pros and cons are given by both sides, and they do not find out whether they are true or not. So the state does nothing. They just put them in there. But this gentleman that runs that center does a great job of that. And then I'd encourage you to go to our website because we have up a couple of different forums. We have one on MCAS. Actually, that's coming in a day or two. We have the one that we did last week on the tip workers. And we also have a really good one that Concord Carlisle League did. And they had this gentleman from the Top Center speak. So it's an hour long, 50 minutes. He spends 15 minutes on everyone. He takes questions, and he's just terrific. I would highly recommend to watch that. That's a good place. I wanted to also let you know that this is canceled. This was supposed to happen tomorrow night if you were planning to go. Josh Tarski's mother died, and so he's out at a funeral in West Coast somewhere. So that will not happen. We will try to reschedule it as a Zoom, but it's obviously going to be late for those of you who've already voted or are voting shortly. And then a reminder, I'm guessing all of you are registered. Voting by mail, you still have the ability to apply for a mail for absentee or early voting. And we have early in-person voting starting this Saturday. There is that Saturday hour and Sunday hours as well. I think it's just one of those days each. But all that information is on the town clerk's website. And if you're from a different town, obviously maybe slightly different, but go to your town clerk's website. And if you're not sure your voting location, go to Where Do I Vote MA, and it tells you just exactly how to do it. So thank you. I've learned a lot from you all tonight. Thank you all for chiming in and helping us kind of get to where we needed to be on this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Carol, this has been excellent. We are
Thank
so
you.
happy that you joined us. Thank you so much.
And I just want to also say how much, it was such an important forum for us to have. And I think we all learned a lot, and hopefully we have some answers in our minds. But I also would like to share that the next Lyceum is coming up November 9th. And it is called Turkey Talk. And it is a very funny woman who is going to talk about everything regarding turkeys. And we thought it was timely in November.
Amy, it might be the 16th. Is it the 9th?
I'm sorry, the 19th.
Okay. Thank you.
And then on December 8th, we have a program called Raising Anti-Racist Kids, How to Get Conversations Started. And that will be, for parents, for grandparents, for teachers. I think it will be a really valuable program. And then that is going to, there's going to be an 8-week workshop starting in January that run by the same people. So that's coming up in December. And if you've left me your email, I will add you to our list. And but we thank everybody for coming tonight. It was a great evening. Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Carol, so much.
Yeah, thanks again, Carol.
Okay, appreciate it. Good night, all.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Carol. Good to see you all.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. I'm looking to see. There's still a few people here, I guess.
Yeah. And I'm just checking, a few people did leave their email.
Let's see. I got the first one. Do you want me to jot them down?
I've got the only one I don't have is.
Did you get Claire Frank? Claire?
Oh, I've got her. She's a neighbor, so I've got.
Oh, okay.
And then one woman said she wanted to be on the list, but didn't give me your.
And how about Brooke Nash?
Yeah,
30?
I've got that one too.
Okay.
So I think we're all set.
Okay, super. Okay.
Right.
Good night.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah.
Okay, good night.
Thank you.